Hey everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of We Are Limitless. I'm Martin Sibley here to be the introducer and the interviewer. And in today's episode, I'll be interviewing Geoff Holt, who is an adventurer and an explorer. Now, Geoff will share a little bit about how he became disabled, which involved diving into shallow waters and becoming paralyzed. But really, Geoff's story is far more about his love of sailing and travel, and he'll be giving you lots of cool and interesting tips from his experience and his journeys. Welcome to the latest edition of We Are Limitless. Today I'm joined by Geoff Holt from sunny Portsmouth. Thank you for joining me today, Geoff.
Hi, morning. Hi, Martin.
So yeah, basically it's a good old chinwag as usual about accessible travel. But it'd also be good to kind of hear, what's your name and where you come from, as Silla used to say.
Okay, Geoff Holt, Portsmouth, down on the sunny south coast of England. I use an electric wheelchair. I'm paralysed from across my chest, and I've been in a wheelchair 30 odd years. And my real passion is probably for sailing. So sailing as a form of travel has taken me to some fascinating places and given me a great life.
So before we sort of go headfirst into the sailing stuff, have you also done lots of travel not because of sailing? Like, do you go on sort of travels and trips and holidays regardless of the sailing, or are they always joined?
Totally. In fact, in many ways, the sailing that I've done in traveling has been on quite high profile adventures. So I've actually only done traveling sailing on 3 occasions in the last 30 years.
Okay.
Albeit big adventures, but no, the rest of it has been as someone who just loves traveling. I've always traveled. I left school, it was on a boat again, but I jumped on a boat and went to the Mediterranean. 16 years old, I spent 16 years in the Med, just learning new languages, cultures.
Yeah.
I was working on a charter yacht, so I had to learn how to speak Spanish. I had to learn how to go shopping with pesetas, and that whole different culture environment really excited me.
And so, I mean, you touched upon the kind of language and the culture and all the rest of it. I mean, since you've travelled with having a disability and being in the wheelchair, how have you found the world? What sort of place have you found to be good and what have been not so good?
Okay, the elephant in the room is probably flying. Flying is the means that takes me to my greatest adventures, and traveling is the thing I hate the most. I just loathe it. I will fly on a plane at least 3, 4, 5 times a year. I've been over to the Far East. I've done South Africa and the Americas, and even more local trips, and it just fills me with horror. I mean, absolute horror. It's the anticipation, the nervousness about what's going to happen, the unexpected. Because nearly every time I fly, it goes wrong in some way, and that anxiety kind of ruins the adventure to come.
Yeah.
That's the thing that upsets me.
I think the viewers will definitely empathise with that. I know a lot of the calls that Limitless Travel get are around sort of, I want to go away, but I've heard that travelling is just terrible. What can we do? And I think in some ways there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't a quick answer other than, as you also said, you have to just suck it up and do it if you want to go and see some of the world and get out there.
The bizarre thing is, when you get to these places, often some of these remote places they are not as bogged down in health and safety as we are in the UK. So when you get there, there's this can-do attitude that, we'll bump you up a flight of steps, we'll lift you in and out of the taxi, we will do all these things to help you, and there's no one standing behind them saying you can't do that. So actually the adventure when you get there is often the more real, and you get to see the true, actually being disabled is a bit of an icebreaker sometimes. Yeah. And because you're not the first disabled person they've seen, some of these more remote places will have plenty of their own disabled people.
Yeah.
Probably the first, European or, British person they've seen in a wheelchair. So it's a challenge, and that's the one thing. Like when I go on holiday now, I do like or go on an adventure. It's easier just to take my vehicle and drive, but even getting the ferry to France is, fraught with difficulties.
Yeah. We've started taking the Euro tunnel train a bit more often because the ferry was getting as not as difficult as flying, but not as perfect as it might have been.
So I did try to briefly on that. I'll give you an example. We live in Portsmouth, so there's 4 ferries a day go to France. You cannot do it spontaneously because all the disabled cabins are booked. So you have to think about this months and months in advance. And when we were on one trip, I remember going back to the cabin about 11 o'clock at night, and there was a fit young couple going into the disabled cabin next to me. But they were with friends, and the friends said to them, in my earshot, "How come you've got the disabled room?" And they said, "We always book the disabled room. It's got so much more room," and they never check.
Oh, wow.
And I was thinking, this is just symptomatic of, it's very well having these disabled facilities, but no one is actually checking that they're being used by the right people. Anyway, I've digressed, sorry.
Yeah. No, there definitely does. Well, it's a trade-off, isn't it? Because I know that on the other side, when every time you want to go somewhere, you actually have to prove you're disabled, that can be as annoying as well. So it's a bit of a trade-off. But yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous that there are people using those facilities that don't need them. But yeah, I've been moving it more into sailing. So I wrote a blog recently. I actually haven't not been sailing since I was a kid. I went with Sailability to Grafham Water, which is about 10 miles away from where I live in Cambridgeshire. And it was just so exhilarating to get out on the water and just to experience sailing again. I know that's been a big part of your backstory, that not only do you enjoy sailing, but you've been very much a part of the movement of making it adapted and accessible. So it'd be great if you could just share a bit more about kind of what opportunities are available for disabled people.
Yeah, I mean, sailing, we use the term sailing quite sort of randomly, but actually when you stop and look at it, sailing is a sport, it's a recreation, it's also an experiential activity, like any form of getting on the water. It doesn't have to be sailing, where actually just being on the water is different to being on the land. And that's what I'm most passionate about, is actually getting on the water. It just happens that most of what I've done in past years has been through sailing. And it gives people, I've noticed, a real purpose when they come and find they can sail. Really importantly, it's something they're doing themselves. They're not being told to go left, go right, faster and slower. Ordinarily they can take control of themselves, of the boat themselves. And they're the ones, so it's down to them when they're sailing or racing against someone else, whether they win or lose. It's pretty weird that some people say they're not sailing, they're not racing, but you put 2 boats on the water and you want to beat the other person. So it is, it's a pathway. There from the very, very beginner, whoever you may be, wherever you may be, there's 160 centres, sailability centres around the UK. I know Grafham really well. I sailed at Grafham a couple of times, So there are centres all over the place that have specially trained instructors to help you get on the water. But that's kind of dinghy sailing, little river type sailing. Then of course you've got the bigger stuff. Some people want to go a bit further afield. That's when the problems start for particular disabilities. There is no means, for example, of anyone with an electric wheelchair to go to sea on any boat at all. Now, people often say the Jubilee Sailing Trust, but that will not take electric wheelchairs. So I refuse to get out of if I'm going to go on a boat, I want to stay in my electric chair, unless I'm lifted out on my own terms. So offshore stuff, which is the really exciting stuff, starts to become more restricted the more disabled you are. And that saddens me, because I think it'll be nice to have far more opportunities to do so around the UK.
And so is that, because I know that you founded Wet Wheels, and doesn't Wet Wheels do some of that in terms of being able to go out with the electric wheelchairs?
Yeah, totally. Wet Wheels is the only, when I talked about no boats taking electric wheelchairs, I mean sailboats.
Right, gotcha.
Wet Wheels is the only power boat, to take people with electric power chairs on the water. It's a concept I came up with 3 or 4 years ago. The boats are 160 grand each. They're not cheap. They've got twin 300s on the back, Suzuki's, and it will do 40 knots. We take 10 passengers at a time, and of those 10, 3 can be in wheelchairs. Quite profound and complex disabilities we look after. And everyone gets to drive the boat. So this is completely different to sailing. It's about getting on the water and enjoying the water, but sharing it with your friends and family, the usual stuff, building confidence and well-being and all of that. But actually, we can train people on the boat as well. So it's completely different to sailing. But it just reinforces my passion about finding ways to get people on the water.
No, that's amazing. Congratulations with that. I mean, it sounds, it's something I need to come. I know we've talked about on email the last couple of years, but I definitely need to come down and experience this myself as well. So we'll get that sorted soon. But closing off this episode of We Are Limitless, really just any thoughts you got, Geoff, for the viewers that are, looking to get more out there with leisure and tourism, and any sort of little nuggets and insights and words of wisdom that you've got for them?
Yeah, I think particularly with travel, oh crikey, I so encourage everyone to travel. I don't even care if it's traveling to the next county for a small holiday, but travel broadens the mind. It really does, and when you go to get the opportunity to go to different cultures and see the way they do things, be prepared to do things differently. I think the nuggets are, don't expect exactly the same as what you might expect in this country in terms of access. But if you're prepared to understand, a lot of these places are far behind, but they're willing to help you.
Yeah.
Having said that, of course, there's lots of places that are far advanced to where we are here, and are really geared up for it. But I choose, personally, I like the more remote places to test myself and learn from these things, and just learn that, and a shared experience, and learn whilst you're doing it. I guess that's my nugget.
Well said. And as you say, you're learning, sometimes that does come from failure's a bit too strong an emotive word, but essentially sometimes things will go wrong, but that's also part of travel, right? It's all part of the adventure.
I couldn't agree more. It is, just so long as you manage that risk, take things slow. If you're new to the thought of jumping on a plane and going to India for 4 months, it's something I love to do, but I'm not yet at that stage.
Yeah.
I wish more trains were accessible. I'd love to do more traveling by train. But yeah, my son he's 15. He's 16 next year and goes to college for 2 years. But we kind of have to be here for him. But I've got my mind made up. The moment he's out of home, we're off somewhere interesting.
Cool. Well, I look forward to hearing where you end up in the future, Geoff, and get in touch if Limitless Travel can help with any of your endeavours. And thank you for your time today.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.